Welcome to Tales Along the Afterlife Road. In this world, there are many strange things around us, the seen and the unseen, the real and the fantasy, the explained and the unexplainable. We are here to find and share those tales we find along this great afterlife road, and hopefully shed some light once and for all about this strange world we live in. I'll be your guide, Ryan. We have many odd stories to share with you today. Let's jump in.
I just got chills.
I'm getting off. The Dark Man by Dr. Dankologist. This is taken from r/no sleep, where we will start our great journey. Hello everyone. Today I want to share with you a disturbing experience I had when I was a child. It happened when I was around 12 years old. I grew up in a relatively quiet neighborhood located in a small Romanian town called Hunedoara. Indoor activities were limited to either reading, watching TV, or playing on an NES clone called Ending Man. God, I miss playing on that thing. It was a warm summer day, and I've been outside for most of the day playing with my friend. Let's call him Mihai. Mihai and I would always hang out and play until the time came to go home. Around 10 p.m., he told me he wanted to go and catch a movie on TV. So we started walking towards the block we lived in. The neighborhood was relatively empty, since many people that lived there were old and usually went to sleep early. We were laughing and goofing around on our way back, when all of a sudden, I caught something moving with the corner of my eye. I dismissed it as being a cat, as there were quite a few cats around, and I kept on walking. Mihai stopped and told me to be silent. "What happened?" I whispered. "Did you hear that?" He responded quickly. "I heard footsteps near us." "I thought I saw something too, man. But I think it's just a cat," I said half-heartedly. "No, man, I'm telling you, those were footsteps, human footsteps. No cat is that heavy." Our conversation was interrupted by the rustling of nearby bushes. I wasn't a scared kid, but the entire situation was starting to creep me out. And Mihai's panicked expression was not helping at all. We started walking faster, constantly looking behind to see if we were followed by someone or something. Soon we were near our block, and we stopped to catch our breath. We looked around, and we didn't see anything weird or out of place. "See, I told you it was a cat. There's nothing out there, you big chicken," I said, while laughing at my friend. "Shut up, you were scared too. Besides, I really don't think that was a cat. I saw Mihai's face slowly turning white as he pointed his finger beside me. Looking at his horrified gaze, I froze, but gathered my courage to turn around and see what he was pointing at. What I saw made my heart jump into my throat. A dark, tall figure, dressed in a black trench coat and a tipped hat, was slowly walking towards us. Normally, that would be enough to scare a kid, but the truly scary part was this. Every time he walked near a streetlight, it would instantly turn off. As soon as he passed it, it would turn on again. We were both scared as hell, but for some reason we couldn't move. As soon as the man was near us, we were able to take a closer look at his face. He had eyes that were all black and a wide, sinister grin that revealed many sharp teeth. And he didn't have a nose. He approached us and said in the creepiest voice I've heard in my entire life, "Little kids like you shouldn't be alone at night. Bad things can happen. Very bad indeed. Come with me. I will keep you safe." After he said this, his grin widened in a way that was not humanly possible. I snapped out of my fear and screamed as loud as I could while grabbing Mihai's arm, running back towards our block's entrance. We must have woken up many people, as quite a few lights turned on and many people were opening their windows to search for the source of the scream. We didn't stop running until we both reached home. I went inside, shut the door, and started crying like a little girl. My mom rushed to hug me, and she asked me what was wrong. I was barely breathing through the tears, and I mumbled an explanation. She hugged me and told me it was probably my imagination, and told me to go to sleep. That night I was shaking with fear. I kept jumping at every little noise I could hear. I constantly looked out my window to check if the man was still there. At some point, I fell asleep. When I woke up in the morning, I heard my mom call for me. When I went in the kitchen, I saw Mihai's mom crying and a policeman trying to calm her down. He told me that Mihai disappeared from his room last night and asked me some questions. I explained as best I could what happened to us, and he was shaking his head in disbelief. He gave my mom his number and told her to call him in case I remembered any further details. As I returned to my room, I worried for my friend's safety, and I saw something that creeps me out even today, almost 10 years later. On my window, there were large scratch marks. I lived on the 4th floor. Our next story comes to us from, once again, r/no sleep. It is the account of a man who had been a paranormal investigator. This story was submitted by Paranormal_20. Paranormal investigation is not fun and exciting. I'll refrain from sharing my own theories here, but all I can conclude from my 20 years of experience is that the spirit realm harbors entities of unspeakable evil. This first story details one example out of many. The house on Cross Hill. In 1999, I drove out to a farmhouse a few miles north of Greenwood, inhabited by a man named Jim. Jim was a friend of a friend, and claimed his house was possessed by a demon. This friend of a friend had contacted me because he wasn't sure if Jim was actually experiencing something or merely going crazy. It was dark by the time I reached the house. I knocked on the door and was met by a ghost. The man in front of me looked exhausted, verging on madness. I was greeted into a home that had clearly not been cleaned in months. After a cup of coffee was placed at my table side, one I was quite reluctant to drink from, Jim told me his story. Jim had been married for 22 years to a woman named Charlotte. He showed me a picture, auburn hair, heavy-set but with a pretty smile. They had moved into the farmhouse in Cross Hill in '96 because their acres over by Newberry had been taken by wildfire. They had tried for children, but Charlotte was infertile. It was only a few months before they started noticing things. Aside from objects being misplaced, footsteps being heard where there should have been none, most striking was that guests, rare as they were, would claim to hear voices coming from inside the house. Even stranger, however, was that the voices had a theme to them. Guests would ask such questions as, "Melissa's here?" believing they heard the voice of a friend named Melissa coming from another room. In the winter of '98, Charlotte was taken by cancer. That is when things took a darker turn, or as he called it started to break me. Only a week after her passing, Jim would start hearing Charlotte's voice in the house. The first time it happened, Jim was sitting on his sofa, watching television. Then he heard a faint, melodic hum coming from the upstairs bathroom. Jim tore up in grief, called her name in desperation, and ran upstairs only to find the room empty. He collapsed in tears. Later that week, Jim had been outside hanging up clothes on the rack when he heard a distant "Jim" coming from inside. Once more, with tears in his eyes, he stormed inside, finding only another empty room. At this point in his story, Jim began to cry in front of me. I don't think he had told anybody about the occurrences before, and it was too much for him to bear. I expressed my sympathies, but told him reassuringly that it was only Charlotte occupying the house, attempting to make contact. "No," he said, his eyes bloodshot, his hands trembling. "You don't understand." In the following weeks, things only got worse. The sound of Charlotte became more frequent and more vivid. Each time, Jim's heart would skip a beat and he would run towards the voice of his dead wife, believing just for a second The diagnosis, the hospital visits, and the funeral had all been a bad dream. Soon, he said, the voice would start being accompanied by laughter. He'd run in, find it empty, and only hear Charlotte's laughing in another room. He said that in the 22 years they had been married, he never heard his wife laugh like that. There was something sinister in it. After about a month after the burial, the first farm animal died to what he insinuated was neglect. Jim had stopped sleeping because at this point, Jim had started waking up at night to the sound of knocks on the front door below. I knew Charlotte's knock. It was just like Charlotte's knock, he sobbed, as I shifted uncomfortably in the chair. As he laid crying in the double bed, Charlotte would then call on him from the dark below. He said this is the first time the voice spoke more than just his name. "I'm back," it had said cheerfully. A month or two later, each sign was now followed by laughter. Not that of delight or joy, but that of pure malice. If Jim was truly sane prior to the occurrences, this is when Jim began to lose his mind. Framed photographs of Charlotte began appearing in places around the house, places he had insisted he had not placed them. One by one, he'd find them shattered on the floor. Then, one late evening by the television, he heard the voice yet again, from the kitchen, and Jim, for the first time, lost it. "What the heck do you want?" Jim screamed desperately. Immediately, the television flooded with static, as the lights in the house began to waver and flicker. White noise shrieking from the speaker, Charlotte's voice penetrated through the white noise, low and distorted, telling Jim to join her. It was becoming increasingly clear to me this was indeed not a manifestation of his wife. This entity was actively tormenting Jim, and as far as I could understand, was trying to make him kill himself. I told him it was going to be all right, and told him he was only dealing with a classic case of a mimic. In reality, I had no idea what I was talking about. I was also beginning to feel rather misplaced. I was either in a house inhabited by a force of true evil, or in a house inhabited by a lunatic. Either way, I wanted nothing more than to get back into my car and drive back to Augusta. My conscience, however, along with my promise to my friend, got me, and I asked Jim if he would mind if I stayed the night. I was led to a guest bedroom by the door. Jim gave me a hug, and again reassured him that I'd do my best to help. He held on to me longer than what was normal courtesy would dictate, still trembling as he did earlier. I said good night, and Jim closed the door. In the bed, when my night vision had just adjusted, I remember looking around the room, at the walls of the room. They were covered in bears. This was not a guest room. It had meant to be a child's room. I awoke that night to the sound of Jim crying from the room adjacent to mine. What I heard next still sends shivers down my spine in recollection. "Jim?" The voice came from the hallway right outside, but something was wrong. More wrong than it already was. The voice was low and rumbling. "I'm back, Jim." Like a voice tuned down a whole entire octave, the voice growled as it lingered outside of Jim's bedroom. Did it not know I was here? Did it not care? Neither answer was better than the other. But I knew, if I ever had a chance to help Jim, the moment was now. I jumped out of bed, flung open the door to the hallway room. I was met by total darkness. Within it, I saw a shape, a figure standing at an impossible height, towering over Jim's door. I blinked, and it was gone. The following morning, Jim and I discussed the encounter over another cup of coffee. I left early, telling him I would be in contact. 3 weeks later, Jim committed suicide. I still do not know if what I saw in the hallway was real or imagined. What I do know, however, is that no part of my imagination could have possibly produced that deep, horrible voice I heard that night. To me, the house of Cross Hill is more of a tragic story than a truly frightening one. In a morbid sense, I take some comforting knowing that he was buried alongside his wife. As my friend would later tell me, some years later, while on a drive up to Greenville, I took a detour and stopped by the grave at the Baptist church. There were no flowers there. I'll try writing a few more of my stories for you after posting this one. I'll also answer any questions in the comments. Thanks. Our last story comes to us from a woman named Jessica M. via thoughtco.com. The title of the story is The Ouija Brings Dread. Last year, my best friend and I decided to experiment with a Ouija board just to see if it worked. We made our own out of paper and used a regular drinking glass as a pointer, so we were pretty skeptical. We were in for a shock. It took a while for the board to warm up, but once it did, it became apparent that we were surrounded by relatives who had passed away. The glass moved extremely slow, and there was nothing scary being said or done. However, halfway through our session, two of our other friends came bursting into the room, laughing and joking. Once they calmed down, we got back to the board. This time, the glass moved extremely fast. We could hardly keep our fingers on it. It started spelling out names and words without us even asking questions. The word it spelled out included murder and lust. We ended the session immediately as we were pretty freaked out. After that, everything went back to normal for a few days. But then I started waking up at 3 a.m. every night with an unexplainable feeling of dread. The waking up continued for a few weeks, and I started becoming depressed for no reason. Then one night, at about 1 in the morning, my friend was walking me home. As we were walking up the road, he claimed he saw a black figure of a man leaning on a fence, staring at us. We laughed and joked about the place being haunted. We did used to hear bells chiming every night on that road. That night, I woke up again, but this time I was being pinned face down on my bed by what felt like a man. I tried to struggle, but I couldn't move. I tried to scream, but nothing came out. He started speaking in my ear, but I don't know what he said. Then he was gone. I hid under my covers, like that would help, and soon fell asleep. I woke up the next morning and put it down to a nightmare, though it felt so real. A few days later, we had a family visiting. My grandma, who claims to be very perceptive, came in and said she felt that there was a presence in the house. My mom said she thought so too, ever since I had done a Ouija board in my bedroom, but she didn't think it was harmful. My grandma disagreed, and she thought it was evil. The next bit is really hard for me to explain because I don't know how I felt. As they were arguing, I began to get the same dreadful feeling I had so many other nights, and began to feel something was wrong. It felt as though I was being pulled into a tunnel, further and further away from the room I was in. I tried to tell my mom I didn't feel right, but I couldn't make myself talk or move. It felt as though something was trying to control me. I finally managed to make myself talk, but I screamed, "There's something wrong with me." The next thing I knew, my sister was beside me, hugging me. I was crying and shaking uncontrollably. My family said that I had looked like I had had some sort of seizure. We got a priest to bless the house, and while he was doing so, all of the pipes in the house made a huge screaming noise, and they didn't stop till we finished the prayer. After that, everything went back to normal. I can't explain what happened to me. It scares me to think of it. I hope you enjoyed this selection of stories. If you did, please leave a like and be sure to subscribe for more. If you have any stories of your own, or any other stories that you'd like me to read, be sure to leave a comment or send it to afterliferoadstories@gmail.com. Thanks for listening.